On your knees, human. Rogan spat blood onto the metal floor, his head throbbing from the impact of the blow. His body ached, bruised and cut from the relentless punishment. He pushed himself up, his breath heavy, defiant. Around him, the massive arena roared with laughter, a cacophony of alien voices mocking him. Before him stood the towering, four-armed brute known as Commander Jorvak, one of the most decorated warriors of the Telnar Dominion. His thick, red-scaled body gleamed under the high-intensity lights, his 6 yellow eyes narrowing in amusement. Still standing, Jorvak chuckled, lifting his massive energy mace. I expected more groveling from a low-born half-blood defender. The crowd jeered at that. Half-blood defender. A taunt meant to ridicule Rogan's crime. Fighting for the right of mixed-species unions. A disgrace in the eyes of the Dominion. But Rogan didn't fight alone. A figure stepped between him and Jorvak. Lean, poised, and unshaken. Sarla. Her violet skin shimmered under the arena lights, her sharp silver eyes flashing with fury. A daughter of the noble Zevani race, she was everything a warrior should be. Agile, intelligent, and utterly fearless. But standing beside a human like Rogan made her an outcast. To the Dominion, she was a traitor, a defiler. She fights beside the human, someone shouted. Disgraceful. Mixed breeders should be wiped out. Sarla ignored them. She turned her gaze to Rogan. Are you done lying down? Or do you need another pep talk? Rogan grinned through the pain. You always did have a way with words. Jorvak slammed his mace into the ground, the shockwave sending cracks through the arena floor. This is your last chance, Sarla, he growled. Step away from the human, and your honor might still be salvaged. Sarla tilted her head, as if considering. Then, with a smirk, she cracked her knuckles. Honor, she said, voice dripping with mockery. You think your system of forced unions and purity laws is honorable? Maybe we should redefine that word. The crowd gasped. Even Jorvak flinched. No one spoke against the Dominion's purity laws. No one dared. Enough, Jorvak snarled, raising his mace. I was going to make this quick. Now, I'll make it slow. The battle was about to begin. But as Rogan and Sarla took their fighting stances, something unexpected happened. The giant doors of the arena slammed open, and an elite battalion of Dominion enforcers stormed in. Their leader, a tall, silver-plated officer, raised his voice. By order of the High Council, the combat is suspended. The human and the Zevani girl will be taken alive. Rogan cursed under his breath. They had expected to die fighting, but now, something worse was coming. They were prisoners, and they knew exactly what fate awaited those who defied the Dominion's purity laws. Rogan's wrists burned against the metal cuffs as he was shoved forward into the High Council chamber. The room was an oppressive dome of gleaming obsidian, filled with rows of elevated seats where the Dominion's most powerful rulers sat in judgment. Sarla was beside him, her own bindings crackling with energy restraints. But she walked tall, chin high, defiant as ever. In the center, seated on an ornate throne of polished bone, was Supreme Arbiter Vorek, a cold, skeletal figure wrapped in crimson robes, his elongated face barely hiding the disgust in his dark, sunken eyes. The filthy half-breeds, he sneered. The disease of the galaxy. The council murmured in agreement. Across the chamber, nobles and warriors alike whispered their contempt. You are both guilty, Vorek continued, of treason against the Dominion, of spitting on the purity of our races, of existing. Sarla interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. Gasps rippled through the hall. Even the guards stiffened. Rogan grinned despite himself. She does that a lot. Interrupts self-important people. Vorek's eyes burned with fury. You mock this trial, human? I mock you, Rogan shot back. Because this isn't a trial. It's a purge. The Supreme Arbiter leaned forward. Then you understand your fate. Death. Sarla scoffed. We were prepared for that before we even stepped into the arena. Death. Vorek let out a dry, humorless laugh. No, girl. That would be too easy. A door slid open behind him. Two enforcers dragged something forward. A figure wrapped in chains, battered, barely conscious. Rogan's heart clenched. It was Drayan. The old scientist was human. But his mind was a weapon that had rattled the Dominion's foundations for years. He had been one of the few researchers daring enough to study human-alien genetic compatibility, proving that mixed species offspring were not only viable, but in some cases, stronger than their parent races. And that was why the Dominion wanted him dead. "You recognize your accomplice," Jorvak said. "This traitor has poisoned our history, spewing lies of hybrid strength. And now, you will watch as his heresy is undone." One of the enforcers activated a glowing data pad, projecting Drayan's research into the air. His life's work, years of study, everything. And with a single keystroke, they began deleting it all. "No," Drayan coughed, struggling against his chains. "You can't. Stop." Sarla lunged, but the energy restraints flared, slamming her to her knees. Rogan's blood boiled. This wasn't just execution. This was erasure. "They will never know the truth," Jorvak said with a chilling smile. "They will never know that humans and aliens can be more than enemies. That we can be more than separate." Sarla's breath was ragged. "You're afraid," she whispered. Jorvak's smile faltered. "You wouldn't erase knowledge unless you feared it," she continued, her silver eyes burning into him. "You know what Drayan found? You know hybrids aren't weak. They aren't impure. They're superior." The room exploded into outrage. Council members shouted over one another, slamming their fists. Jorvak stood, his face contorted in rage. "You will never spread such lies again." He raised his hand. "The execution order." Rogan's instinct screamed. They had seconds. He met Sarla's eyes. "Now or never." She nodded. And with one swift, violent motion, they made their move. The moment Jorvak's hand came down, signaling their execution, Rogan and Sarla exploded into action. Rogan twisted hard, wrenching his bound hands under his legs and swinging them over his head. The sudden movement caught the nearest enforcer off guard, just enough for him to ram his shoulder into the guard's gut. The impact knocked them both backward, and Rogan seized the moment to grab the enforcer's shock baton. At the same time, Sarla snapped her wrists apart. Her energy restraints flickered, then shorted out. The fools had underestimated Zevani muscle control. In one fluid motion, she vaulted into the air, spinning as she kicked the second enforcer straight across the jaw. The snap of bone was satisfying. The chamber erupted into chaos. "Stop them!" Jorvak screeched. Guards surged forward, but Rogan was already moving. He slammed the baton into the first soldier's helmet, sending a crackling jolt through the armor. Sarla landed beside him, snatching a plasma blade from a fallen enforcer and activating it mid-spin. "Get Drayan!" Rogan shouted. Sarla was already ahead of him. She dashed toward the scientist, cutting his restraints in one swift strike. Drayan barely had the strength to stand. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, his limbs weak, but his voice was sharp. "They're deleting my data. We have to stop them." Rogan turned, eyes locking onto the glowing projection screen where the Dominion's purge was in progress. 80% deleted. His heart pounded. Then his eyes found something else. The Dominion officer still holding the control pad. "That's my target." He launched himself forward, ducking under a wild plasma shot. Another enforcer tried to grab him. He twisted, flipping the brute over his shoulder. He reached the officer and punched him square in the throat. The officer gagged, dropping the control pad. Rogan caught it before it hit the ground. His eyes scanned the interface. 93% deleted. No time to think, no time to second guess. He did the only thing he could. He hit reverse. The screen flickered. The remaining 7% on delete. Then 10%. Then 15%. "No!" Jorvak's scream was inhuman. Guards swarmed Rogan. He barely had a second to react before a massive force slammed into him, sending him skidding across the chamber floor. The control pad flew from his hands. Sarla caught it midair, spinning to Drayan. "Can you secure the data?" she yelled. Drayan's fingers blurred across the screen, his tired eyes blazing with determination. "I just need a few." A plasma bolt tore through the air, straight for Drayan. "No!" Rogan tackled the scientist out of the way just in time. The shot blasted into the ground, leaving a molten crater where Drayan had stood. Sarla turned, fury in her eyes. She hurled her plasma blade like a spear. It found its mark, embedding itself into the shooter's chest. Jorvak, shaking with rage, grabbed a ceremonial energy staff from his throne. The Supreme Arbiter charged. "You will not leave this chamber alive." Rogan's body screamed in pain, but he forced himself up. He met Sarla's gaze. She tossed him a blade. He caught it, and as Vorak swung, Rogan and Sarla struck back. Vorak's energy staff crashed down, but Rogan dodged at the last second. The weapon slammed into the ground, sending a shockwave through the chamber floor. Rogan rolled, came up swinging, and clashed blades with the Supreme Arbiter. Sparks flew as their weapons locked. "You filth," Vorak spat, his elongated face twisted with hate. "You think your mutant kind will ever replace the pure bloodlines of the Dominion? You think you can win?" Rogan gritted his teeth. "I don't think it. I know it." With a roar, he shoved Vorak back. But the Arbiter was fast, too fast. He twisted, swinging the energy staff in a brutal arc. Rogan barely ducked in time. Sarla lunged from the side, plasma blade aimed for Vorak's ribs. The Arbiter saw her coming. He sidestepped and slammed his elbow into her gut. The force sent her skidding across the floor. Rogan's heart stopped. "Sarla," she coughed, blood on her lips, but still, she tried to stand. Vorak laughed. "Pathetic." He turned back to Rogan, raising his staff for the killing blow. A shot ripped through the air. Voikstek. He clutched his chest, his robe smoking from a plasma wound. Behind him, hunched over the stolen control pad, was Drayan. The old scientist had fired the Dominion officer's own sidearm. His hands shook, his breaths ragged. "You should have let history speak for itself," he rasped. Vorak snarled, stepping toward him. But Rogan didn't let him take another step. With every ounce of strength left in his battered body, he drove his blade straight through the Arbiter's chest. Vorak's 6 eyes widened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a final, choking gasp, the Supreme Arbiter of the Dominion collapsed. Dead. Silence filled the chamber. The remaining guards stared, horrified. The unthinkable had happened. Their leader, the symbol of Dominion power, had fallen to a half-blood defender. Rogan turned to Sarla, breathless. "You good?" She wiped the blood from her lips, smirking. "Took you long enough." Drayan, still shaky, held up the control pad. "It's done. The data is backed up. We've recovered everything." Rogan felt his chest tighten. Everything they'd fought for, the proof, the research, the truth they'd tried to bury, was saved. But alarms were blaring. Guards were regrouping. They wouldn't have long. Sarla grabbed Rogan's hand, eyes fierce. "Time to go." They ran. Out of the chamber. Through the corridors. Past the statues of Dominion rulers who thought themselves untouchable. They weren't untouchable anymore. Because the lie of purity had been shattered. Because history had just changed. Forever.